Okay, so like I said previously, my goal is to port this application, which we use to host our book's contents, from Writer and Blaze to FlowRouter and React. Now, one way to do this would be to simply, just start a new project from scratch, add React, add FlowRouter, and go from there. But doing that, sure, you can do that, but there's a lot of risks and it takes a lot of time. So a better approach, in my opinion, is to go step by step. So try to identify the smallest thing we can change that will get us towards our goal while preserving all the functionality of the app. And in this case, I think it's subscriptions. So in Iron Router, we subscribe inside the router at the route level. In other words, if we need to load any kind of data, when we hit that route, Iron Router will subscribe. And once the subscription is done, it then proceeds to the route. Now, FlowRouter doesn't work like that, doesn't handle subscriptions. So even before we implement FlowRouter or React, we can already switch out our subscriptions from the router level to the template level. So one thing that's going to be really useful throughout this whole process is referring to the Meteor guide, which you can find at guide.meteor.com. And the Meteor guide is basically a repository of best practices for architecturing Meteor apps. So the current chapter here addresses publications and data loading. And here's what it says about where to subscribe to data. It is best to place the subscription as close as possible to the place where the data is needed. What this means in practice is that you should place your subscriptions call in templates. In Blaze, it's best to do this in the uncreated callback. So even though our ultimate goal is to use React, we'll have quite a few transition steps, so we'll use this pattern for now. So that's the first thing we need to do, put our subscriptions in the uncreated callback. Another thing to note is there's actually, kind of two types of subscriptions. You could call them global and local subscriptions. And global subscriptions are simply subscriptions that need to be loaded before your whole app. So typically things like settings or things that would be used throughout the app and not just on a specific route, those are all global. And here's what it says. It's generally a good idea to use a layout template, which you wrap all your templates in to subscribe to this subscription. So we can start to see kind of an architecture emerging where you'll have some subscriptions on the layout template, and those are global, and then on specific routes you'll have subscriptions kind of at the component level. One more thing I want to point out before moving on is routing. So I'm not talking about routing yet. In fact, at this stage I will keep Iron Router. All I will do is remove subscriptions out of the router. But one thing we'll have to figure out is how to redirect dynamically. And what we mean by that is, let's say you want to restrict some pages to logged in users, such as, the admin area over here. Well, in order to do that, you need to know if the user is an admin or not, right? In other words, you need to wait for the user subscription to return its data. And, you can't do that in the router anymore because the router doesn't know about subscriptions. So, how do you do that? And this is where this pattern comes in, the root redirector route. Basically, all this means is the layout template will also have to take care of all these redirects on top of global subscriptions. Now, To figure out what we need to do in practice, I think the easiest way is just to search throughout the whole code base for meteor.subscribe. So what do we have here? The first result is in main.js, and it's just these two subscriptions kind of hanging out by themselves. So this probably isn't the best way of subscribing because we don't know when they're done subscribing or anything. In fact, I'm not even sure if it's used or not in the code base, but this is something, we'll have to figure out. I'm pretty sure if you look at a legacy Meteor app, you'll find lots of these like kind of weird half-baked patterns throughout your app. Now the other place is router.js, which does make sense. And you can see here we have these so-called global subscriptions in router.configure. So at least it's good because they're all in one place. And then if I search here, in some routes we have more subscriptions. Here one for the users, which is all users in the app, basically for the user dashboard. A single user for the user profile screen, and purchases for the purchases dashboard. So not too bad. We have a bunch of global subscriptions and then 3 local ones. And actually that's all we have. All the other results here are from the actual book content. They're not, those are all markdown files. They're not part of the code base. So this gives us a pretty good blueprint of what we need to do. And it's probably easiest to start with the global subscriptions, right? So we actually already have a layout template, which is right here. So yeah, we'll have to figure out how to adapt this template to add the subscriptions at that level. And this is what I'm going to work on next. So I just went ahead and took care of subscriptions. And now let me walk you through what I did exactly. So as I said, we had these global subscriptions here in the router.configure block. So the first thing I did is comment them out. And I then went to layout.html, which is called from right here, is the template that kind of wraps the whole app. And I added this if app ready thing, else loading. So basically, if the app is ready, then display the app. If not, display the loading template. Now this is just a template helper, which we need to define. And I then did that right here. First thing I did is create an uncreated block to hold the actual subscription calls. And you'll notice I'm using a template.subscribe instead of meteor.subscribe. So if we check the Meteor docs real quick, template.subscribe is a version of meteor.subscribe that is stopped when the template is destroyed. In this case, the layout template is never going to be destroyed, so this doesn't really matter. The cool thing though is that this exposes template.instance.subscriptionsReady variable, reactive variable, which tracks the ready state of all template subscriptions. So in this case, we have quite a few. So this way we don't need to kind of wire up a big like if statement. We can just use that. And this is what we do here in the app ready helper. Now we could just use the template.subscriptionsReady built-in helper like this. By the way, this is basically exactly the same pattern I'm using. The only reason I'm not using this is because, maybe later on we might want to return other things here, or who knows, you might want to cache the templates or, the subscriptions. So, just in case, I have this kind of extra step where I can return other things to like a session variable or whatever. But that's not really necessary. It's just an extra step. So yeah, that's how it works. And we can test that right now. I'll reload the page and wait a little. Okay, and we can see our spinner, and then once it's done, it shows the app. Now the spinner took a couple seconds, and that's because I added this call Meteor.sleep for millisecond 2000. This is a really handy debug feature. You can just add that in any publication. This way, when you're testing locally and you're not sure if the loading spinner is working or not, you can just add that to delay the subscription. So the other thing I did was for the... so I didn't do this one, but I did do that one, the user route. So this is the user profile page. Now you'll notice we have two things. We have the wait on callback and the data callback. So this is telling the router to wait for the result of the subscription before proceeding. And this is telling the router to set the data context of the template that's being called, the profile template, to this object right here. Now, in the new FlowRouter world, the router doesn't know about subscription, so it also cannot set the data context, right? Because the data isn't there yet. So that's why I had to remove both of these and replace them by, first of all, an if ready, just like before. Now again, we could use a template.subscriptionsReady, doesn't really make a difference. And here in the helpers, we have our subscription, pretty much the same thing. The only difference is we have a parameter here, which comes from the router. Now, in Iron Router, traditionally, you might set this as part of the template data context instead of like fetching it from the template, but this is more FlowRoutery, if that's a word. So let's do it this way for now, since we'll change that anyway. And then we have our ready helper and our user helper, which is right here. So if we look at the result, let me hide this, reload. So you'll see once it reloads that first it hits the global loading spinner, and then it displays the user, which is pretty fast because I didn't add a sleep for millisecond in that publication. So that's about it. Thankfully, this app is pretty simple, so I just have to do that 2 more times for the admin stuff. But I will need to look at all these data callbacks here and also change that, because like I said earlier, FlowRouter doesn't really work like that. So even though in this case this route isn't subscribing, it's not waiting on data because the data was waited on globally previously, we still have to get rid of this, basically just with the same way we did here with like a with whatever, and then set the whatever in, sorry about that, in the template helpers. So that's it for part 1. As you can see, there's nothing super complex about it. It's just a lot of small changes. But the nice thing about this way of doing things is, as you can see, the app still works, right? I haven't broken anything. So that's pretty cool.